Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and as Mercedes have explained exactly how they plan to upgrade their engine for the rest of the season, which they're certainly going to need to do given their 15 brake horsepower deficit it seems right now to Ferrari, Christian Horner of Red Bull has also said that he believes that Lewis Hamilton will still play a factor in this year's championship, despite the fact that the Mercedes clearly is way off the pace right now. Very much intriguing your thoughts in the comment section below, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. The Miami Grand Prix is just around the corner. This is kind of the lineup they're going to have at the Hard Rock Beach Club. This is what the track looks like in kind of the top left if you guys can just about make it out. It's definitely an interesting one. People have made their thoughts be known, to be honest. I guess we'll see this weekend or next weekend how it actually plays out, to be honest. It's rather tough to call until we actually get to the venue itself. This also, if you guys kind of remember, they were going to do a team principals parade at the Miami Grand Prix. I believe they're still going to do like a proper opening ceremony, so they're really kind of leaning into the Americanism of this, which I guess is kind of cool. It makes sense, I guess, locally. But yeah, they were going to do a team principals parade where they drive around on the truck or whatever and wave to the fans. Not doing that anymore. Toto Wolff says, like, I prefer to avoid it anyway. I don't think we should really be doing that. I like the fans, but it's the drivers that should be at the forefront. So there'll still be the drivers' parades, but again, they've cancelled the team principals one, if you guys heard about that. Now, this also was rather interesting that came out yesterday, with then, well, the potential of what might happen in 2023, where there's going to be a revised qualifying format. I think the idea is here from the FIA is that they want to try and make sure that the teams aren't like using too many tyres. I think they want to kind of reduce maybe the environmental impact or whatever. Like they want to reduce the amount of tyres that the teams go through in a particular season. So they've thought of an idea where 2 races next year will be done in a revised qualifying format where it will be mandatory for the teams to use the hard compound in Q1 in qualifying, medium in Q2, and the soft compound in Q3. And therefore they'll give the teams half as many soft tyres as usual and 1 more medium and hard tyre than usual. So rather interesting stuff, to be honest. But yeah, apparently that's the idea, that there's going to be a reduction in the total number of tyre sets. This might be a way to kind of compensate for that. But it seems like a really strange solution to me, because obviously you're going to want the softs on anyway in Q3, and of course this year they kind of dropped the idea that if you qualify into Q3 from Q2, you have to use the tyres that you had in Q2, right, in that particular case, but that probably created some issues for cars further with the back wear. If you're Williams, it's probably better not to try and go on the softs to get to Q3, but just kind of settle for, like, you know, starting on the mediums in like 11th place or something. So they are trying to play around with it, but yeah, the idea that you have to use the hards in Q1, like mediums in Q2, just seems rather strange, because some teams, like at some cars, for example, like this year's Williams, Albon has said, and the Williams team has said that their car really likes the hard tyre, but and the other tyres they don't seem to like too much. So kind of a strange one, because different teams are kind of, well, prefer different compounds. Forcing them to use these compounds in this way seems a little bit strange, but I suppose we'll see if this goes through. Just another of that, well, many ideas seemingly that they're coming up with right now. So anyway, here are the team standings after the Imola Grand Prix. Ferrari first, Red Bull not far behind them. This is in terms of constructors, of course, and then Mercedes third place. They've finished all the races, but of course not really accrued all that many points. So Lewis Hamilton has kind of been the big discussion, right, because he's well quite a way behind his teammate George Russell already. Very difficult performance in Imola, as of course with the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, but Alonso kind of says, look, it's not necessarily about the driver, because look, the car is obviously very crucial. That's the thing, like people always talk about the car with Lewis Hamilton for the last several years, but it's always generally the thing with Formula 1 drivers when they win the championship. Yes, they have to be very talented and consistent and all this type of stuff, but you also need a pretty damn good car. And as well, Alonso says, this is Formula 1. When Senna won the titles, he had the fastest car. When I won 2 titles, I had the fastest car. Like, he may be able to race very well, but he will cross the line in P13. That's how it goes if the car isn't good enough, right? So that's a statement that got quite a lot of traction yesterday from Fernando Alonso. But Christian Horner still believes that Hamilton can be a factor in this championship. It's a very long one. Obviously, Mercedes right now are way off the pace. Like, in terms of pure race pace, I think they've actually got slightly worse from Bahrain to now. Like, in terms of gap to the leader. On lap time, their car actually, if anything, looks worse than it did at the start of the season, which obviously isn't a great sign at all. And a qualifying and tyre warm-up, they've had so many issues in that. The race pace looks okay compared to the rest of the midfield, but qualifying in a good position when overtaking is difficult at a track like Imola is really costed them this past weekend. But it's obviously not like Lewis Hamilton has forgotten how to drive or anything. Like, that's what kind of Horner says right here. Like, it was only 5 races ago, they were fighting for a world championship. He's not forgotten how to drive. They'll get that car sorted out, and he can still be a factor in this championship. So we don't underestimate any of our opponents. All we can really do is focus on ourselves, etc., etc. So rather interesting, because obviously Hamilton believes himself he's out of the fight, which I think is probably justifiable at the current point. It very much seems like it's going to be a Verstappen versus Leclerc, fight for the championship. Red Bull versus Ferrari in terms of constructors. So I can't imagine Horner is realistically expecting Hamilton to be fighting for the Drivers' Championship or Mercedes to be fighting for the Constructors' Championship, but who knows how quickly they can turn things around. It's more like that he might be a factor towards the end of the season in terms of stealing points effectively, right? Like, look, who knows if we get to the end of the season, the Mercedes all of a sudden are good. It might be too little too late for them to try and fight for any championships, but Hamilton might be there competing for race wins, like Russell there on the podium week in, week out, right? Who knows how things are going to go? And at that point, obviously, it does create a little bit more of a complication for Red Bull and Ferrari. If the Mercedes also competing at the front, they've got to think about, okay, well, we're going to lose points of these guys, it's going to mess up how things are at the front of the grid, right? And that's the kind of the thing. If you need to catch, let's say, Verstappen's X amount of points behind Leclerc, but if he wins the last 2 races and Leclerc is seconds, then all of a sudden, like, he overturns the gap or something, but all of a sudden Hamilton's there in the Mercedes and he's winning races. Now, the points difference is a bit different, right? So certainly he can still be a factor in the championship. Of course, it's going to take the car to improve somewhat. Whether he can actually compete for it is probably something which is too far gone at this point. Let's say, okay, maybe the car comes to Miami and it's the best car on the grid and they win all 19 races from now on to the rest of the season. And okay, yeah, Hamilton wins the Good Drivers' Championship, right? But it's probably not going to happen. And certainly he's also said, right, Red Bull are wary. Okay, there's a long way to go. 19 more races. Like, the championship will ebb and flow. The cars are very immature. It's going to be about who can develop the best, most efficiently and effectively. So that's kind of the thing. The Ferrari versus Red Bull development war has been seen. And that's the thing. Like, they both have good cars and they can take good steps, whereas Mercedes have to fix their car first before they can do that, right? So probably it's too little too late. But I think Horner's right in the sense that he still can be a factor towards the end of the season in terms of determining which way the championship might go, even if he himself isn't necessarily kind of, fighting for it this time around. And that's kind of the statement that was made right here. He hasn't forgotten how to drive in the last 4 races. That's obviously true, but he might have to drive in a slightly different way, right? Because that's been the thing the last few years. He's obviously had a faster car. He can make the overtakes that, by effectively just raw speed around the outside. And he's obviously very talented in those positions anyway, but he's kind of, in the last few years, has had to take less risk in some of these overtakes because the car is, good enough to get the job done. This year, he might have to take some more risky maneuvers that he maybe wouldn't usually do just because the car doesn't quite have what it takes, right? So maybe a slight change in driving style is going to be necessary this season. I suppose we'll see how it goes, but, he himself has kind of said, look, it's not going to happen this time around. And maybe, if anything, that takes the pressure off him to some degree. But, still, when you are a 7-time world champion, the eyes are going to be on you regardless of the situation, right? I guess as they were with Schumacher when he made that return and probably stayed around in Formula 1 too long. And of course, Hamilton doesn't want to be a jeopardy of, doing the same thing that Schumacher did towards the end of his career. Now, Mercedes have kind of said what their plans are to improve on the power unit front, because the kind of leak came out yesterday that Ferrari are 15 horsepower or so ahead of the Mercedes engine right now, whereas they actually had a 15-20 horsepower deficit last year. So kind of crazy how things have turned around. And of course, they're not actually allowed to upgrade the engine from a purely performance purpose this season. They can only upgrade from a reliability standpoint, but they can play around with some things. That's the thing that Ferrari believe they have more in the tank from this engine, but if they can make it more reliable, then they can turn the engine up effectively. So that's kind of the key here, to improve the reliability so that you can run it at max force effectively with all the modes that you want to run. And that's kind of what Mercedes are maybe getting at, saying they can only do things for reliability. That doesn't stop us looking at what we can do with the engine modes, how we can use those better, whether there's anything more we can gain in how we're deploying the modes that are available. So it doesn't seem to be all that much confidence to take, they're just going to unlock another 10-15 brake horsepower from this car, which seemingly Ferrari have in their back pocket. But we're not quick enough, and when you're not quick enough, you have to look at all areas for improvement. So the remit of the power unit people is to focus on that and look at any fine-tuning that we can possibly do to find gains. And on the chassis side, we've got a lot of different projects at the moment to try and move forward as well. He also goes on to talk about some of the aerodynamics. That said, they didn't really bring anything new, of course, to the Imola Grand Prix. I believe they do plan to, though, for Miami. And then, of course, beyond that in Barcelona, that's certainly when some big changes are going to come. I believe that's when Ferrari are going to plan to bring some major upgrades as well. And if they can deal with their kind of porpoising issues, then they'll really get on top of things, right? But as I said, he goes on to say here, this was normal aero development. To be honest, we're working on the issues we've got bouncing with separately, right? So like the developments we brought here to Imola weren't really, we kind of knew it wasn't going to affect the porpoising. If anything, it looked worse, right? Maybe just because that backstraight is pretty bouncy as it is, right? But it wasn't pretty to watch those cars bounce along and down those straight, there's no doubt. But as an aside, we're still working hard to try and understand, get on top of all this type of stuff. And also, he mentions the tyre warm-up, right? That's kind of been the key concern for Mercedes really the last couple of races, is that in qualifying, especially on the kind of wet and cold day that they had on qualifying on Friday, the tyres were just getting nowhere near warm enough. And that was also the thing that was mentioned right at the start of the video, actually, when we talked about the potential of going onto the hard tyres for Q1. Like, what would that look like, right? Because warming up those hard tyres and getting them activated and ready to go to do a flying lap, like, it's going to take a good few laps of warm-up, I think, on those hard tyres. You're just going to be doing push lap after push lap after push lap in Q1 to try and get those tyres warmed up, especially if some teams struggle with that, as Mercedes certainly do. And like, how are you going to do these, like, how many push laps in a row to fire up those hard tyres if there's like 20 other cars on the track, right? So that's probably one of the other issues with the whole idea of forcing hard compounds in Q1, especially for teams like Mercedes. I'm sure, at least where their car is right now, they wouldn't be too happy about that, because they're certainly struggling even at the best of times with the soft compounds on, right, when it's cold and stuff, as it was at Imola. They didn't seem to struggle so much, for example, at Bahrain, right, in Australia and some of the hotter circuits, but at the cooler circuits, they really do seem to be struggling with this issue, right? So we'll see how that goes. That's something they also have to get on top of. So yeah, definitely not a kind of a silver bullet that's going to make this car straight to the front of the grid, but of course, as we've said, it's still possible that they can have some sort of impact on the way the rest of the championship goes. This is also from Total Wolf, just to mention, of course, he is kind of going to say this, but I thought it was rather interesting regardless. I couldn't couldn't be happier with our driver lineup. Of course, yeah, I think he really respects the relationship that Hamilton and Russell have going on, like what Hamilton can kind of teach Russell, what Russell can take away from, like, you know, being with one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. But you know, he says in that respect, I think we have the two best drivers, maybe two of the three best drivers, and they deserve a car and a power unit that fights at the front rather than them being lapped, because it was only Hamilton that got lapped at Imola. But yeah, kind of interesting. Two of the three best drivers. I believe that you know, he's basically said that he thinks Verstappen is the other driver in that conversation, not Charles Leclerc as of yet. But of course, Ferrari, if you ask them, they're also going to say that they have the best driver lineup on the grid, right? So of course the teams are going to say this, but some interesting comments regardless. And just to mention this from Formula 1 fan 2004, who put this on the Reddit, I thought was kind of interesting just how far back this goes. This is the last 10 individual drivers to lead the Drivers' Championship. So of course, Charles Leclerc leads it as of 5 days ago. He's in the lead. Max Verstappen, 138 days ago after Abu Dhabi, led the championship. Hamilton led it briefly after the Russian Grand Prix, of course. Valtteri Bottas, actually not too bad for a number 2 driver back in 2020 after the Styrian Grand Prix. Vettel in 2018 led it, of course, for Ferrari. Then Nico Rosberg after winning that championship. Kimi Räikkönen back in 2013. So kind of crazy, right? We've got 3 Mercedes drivers, bit of Ferrari, bit of Red Bull, and then I guess you just got Kimi Räikkönen sitting here, right? So I guess was in the Lotus back in 2013, and even Mark Webber back to 2010, right? It's kind of interesting. I thought that the last 10 drivers to lead the Drivers' Championships dates back all the way to 2010, with them, you know, Webber and then Button just after that. But very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.